Welcome to the Winging It Travel podcast with me, James Hammond. Every Monday, I'll be joined by guests to talk about their travel stories, travel tips, backpacking advice, and so much more. Are you a backpacker, gap year student, or simply someone who loves to travel? Then this is the podcast for you, designed to inspire you to travel. There'll be stories to tell, tips to share, and experiences to inspire. Welcome to the show. Hello and welcome to this week's episode where I'm joined by Neil Laird, who is a TV producer, novelist, documentary maker, and an avid traveller. Neil is an LGBTQIA+ multiple Emmy-nominated director of historical films for Discovery, BBC, PBS, History Channel, National Geographic, and many others. He's produced programs around the globe featuring various things like the Egyptian tombs, lost Mayan cities, etc. And for 25 years, he's travelled the globe making non-fiction films about the ancient world. Today, we'll discuss Neil's eye-opening backpacking trip, which I'm really keen to hear about, what it's like to make TV documentaries worldwide, and why he has changed courses to now write novels. Neil, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
So where are you right now?
I'm in Brooklyn, New York, which is home. I'm going to keep the media companies, yeah. But I always itchy feet. I'm always ready to go somewhere else.
Do you have any other bases worldwide?
I don't. New York is my home. That's where my husband is, and that's where the business is. But every couple of weeks, I'm on a flight. I'm off to Turkey next week for a month. You know, so it's just a wanderlust that basically, as we'll talk about, I was able to sort of incorporate into my career. Thank God, because I don't know what I'd do otherwise. I'd dry up and tumble away if I wasn't booking a flight somewhere on Expedia.
God, you sound like me in terms of like I need something booked.
Exactly.
Do you know what the biggest question is? How do you get that job or that income that correlates with travel? That is the big question, right? If you can get those two things combined, if you're a traveler, yeah,
exactly. And I lucked out in that I did it with my TV work, but even then I realized, I also realized as I got older too, is traveling for work is a lot less fun than traveling for fun. So there is work travel. I work in television and people say, oh my God, you work for National Geographic, you work for Discovery. Can I carry your bags? I'll do anything. I said, honey, you do not want to travel with me. I'm in 3 days in Morocco to shoot 6 hours of television, and I'll be working around the clock, and I'll be knackered, and it was like, everyone's going to be grumpy because we're working too long. It's a great eye-opening. It's a wonderful way to see the world, but it is work.
Yes, that is interesting because I listened to a podcast the other day about football, right? So I'm a big soccer fan, if you like. Mm-hmm. But they're talking about this perceived thing about sports people, especially soccer players. They travel to well play football, which is true, right? They travel around, they play a game. Mm-hmm. They say people think, oh, it must be amazing to get paid that much money, but also to play a sport and see the world. But like, we don't see the world. We literally fly in, go to hotel, train, play the game, fly back that evening or that early next morning. They don't see the place.
All my friends who work in the travel industry too. They're the airline students, whatever. It's like, you're going to St. Lucia today for 2 hours.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So,
because I would, as a kid, think, oh yeah, football players, they must like see the world all the time.
Remember when we were kids and we thought how amazing travel was? My first trip abroad, and I'm forgetting that, was to England when I was a student, and just going to London for a semester was so far-flung and so exotic, which you would never, as you know, as a Brit, would use exotic and Britain in the same term anymore. But to me, as an 18-year-old kid from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, trust me, it was the world. So the idea that you're getting on a plane and going somewhere was so wonderful. And the only thing about traveling as much as we do is after a while, I wouldn't say it becomes rote, but the magic wears off and you recognize another airport, another delay, another customs, and I love when I get there, but you can't step in that same river twice.
Yeah. Do you think you're forever chasing that first hit of maybe like culture shock or just something that's a bit really mysterious, a bit out there? Do you think we're always chasing that now?
I certainly am. And I know, when I talk about where my travel began, and we can always back up, but I can certainly think, I remember the moment where I kind of felt I want to do this forever. And it was an unrealistic thought because it was impossible. I'd go broke. But I was backpacking to the Middle East, and I was in eastern Turkey on my way to the Iranian border, and I was alone. And this was 92, 93, so it's been a good while. And I realized at that point, this was before internet, before even cyber cafes and all that stuff. All I had was a Lonely Planet and my ticket home and a passport. That was all that Neil Laird haunted. If they found my body, that's all they would know to identify me. You know, that and maybe the dental records or whatever. But as I was working my way to the border, I kind of recognized I got lost, ended up in a town I wasn't expecting to go. And I was standing on some train platform thinking like, I never heard of this town until this morning. And here I am alone. And I never felt so free and so unburdened in my life. Once the fear went away and I realized, because the Turkish are such wonderful people, I didn't feel in any way threatened by what I was meeting. But there I was floating. I was floating and I was in this place alone and on my own. No one had any idea where I was, what I was doing, and it didn't matter. And I was making this shit up as I went. And I have been trying to recapture that moment for the last 30 years. And it's not easy, of course, the more you travel, because, of course, you become more cynical, it becomes more comfortable. When you go into television like me, they fly you first class somewhere. So it's no longer the sense of, oh, my God, the eye-opening experience. Suddenly we're in Iran.
So do you think the only way to maybe get near that is to go to places that are a bit left field? So maybe like you now going to Canada, for example, is not going to be thrilling, right? But if you drop yourself now into someone like, I don't know, Venezuela or somewhere like completely out there, and that sort of trip is a loose trip, maybe a hitchhiking, whatever. Do you think you need that sort of test to get back to that?
In a way you do, but I also realize it's kind of hard to replicate that, because I would touch down someplace in, I don't know, in some Indonesian island that I've never been to before. And I'm starting looking around, I'm thinking, this reminds me of Honduras mixed with Morocco, whatever.
Yeah.
So I have so many memories, they blur together. So it's hard to find the completely undiscovered. That sense. I remember my first trip again to the Middle East. I flew into Tel Aviv and I was taking I don't know why. My friend was meeting me in Cairo and I saved, $6.50 by flying to Tel Aviv and taking a 14 frickin' hour bus down to the Sinai Desert. Because that's what you do when you're a kid. You have no idea. But I remember as I flew in, I was landing in Tel Aviv after one of those overnight flights, and I started to get this fear. It was the first trip abroad, except for the UK and Western Europe, which is where there doesn't count. And I started to get very nervous, like, how am I going to find the bus depot? How am I going to find money? And there was a sense of palpable fear that was overcoming. And I remember there's this Israeli guy sitting next to me, and I'm asking him about money, and I'm asking all these questions. You can see the fear in my eyes. You'll figure it out. You'll figure it out. It's okay. And I got there and I found my way on a bus, and I went to the bus station, and I remember reaching out. I put a big fistful of money in front of some Iranian guy who was like selling me a shawarma or whatever because I was so hungry. And I gave him was probably like $172. And he took one bill and put my hand on it and says, "You be careful with the rest." And that I could saw that man's face because he was so tender to me. But I mention this because that was 92, and I had not traveled again to Israel until now. I'm a showrunner, executive producer on TV shows, and was flying over to Israel to do a show, History Channel, called Digging for the Truth, which is an archaeology show that ran a good while. And this time again, if it wasn't first class, it certainly was, with all the bells and whistles, and it was very comfortable. And I remember as I'm landing in Tel Aviv again for the first time in maybe 20 years, I started to get very nervous as I land, and started to get very, very uncomfortable. And I'm thinking, like, what the hell have I forgotten? The script is in order. Did I forget the car name for the equipment? I'm going through all the natural stuff that I'm thinking, what about the shoot did I get wrong? And it was only as I'm landing and I see the landscape of Tel Aviv, all the swimming pools and the regular houses, at the penny drops, and I realized I am tapping into the fear of that little kid from 1992 who is coming back to this place. And it was a bittersweet feeling because I was such a different person.
Yeah.
The fear was there, but the fear wasn't real. Once I realized there were people waiting for me at the airport to take me to Jerusalem where the camera crew was waiting. So although I was going back, I realized how much I had changed. And I missed that first trip. I kind of wanted to be lost and afraid. I want to be sitting there next holding a fistful of shekels and being scared shitless. And of course you can't, because the great gift of travel was after a while, you start to suss it out and it starts to make sense. But that's what drives travel for me, is that sense of the unknown. And there might be something out there still I bump into that defines it. Yeah. But as I've gotten older, I realize kind of hard to replicate that sense of novelty.
Yes, and I'm the same as you. Right? I've dropped myself into El Salvador in November, and I'm overlanding on my own to Mexico City because I'm
Okay.
like, I've not been Central America. I've been to South America, but not Central America. El Salvador has kind of recovered from its
Hmm.
troubled past, should we say? So I'm like,
Hmm.
there's a bit of fear there. You know, I'm on my own.
Yeah,
My
it's a
girlfriend's
bit
staying
still a
here,
little dodgy. Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
but but I just need to go and do it and see what's
Are
going
you
on.
doing it because you're chasing that same dragon as I am?
There's probably a tiny bit in there, but most of it is intrigue because El Salvador's, in my eyes, always been off the map. You know, for the generic traveler, now's a good time to go. So I'm intrigued to see what the country's like. I'm excited to go and test out what their customs like in terms of like, getting the chicken buses, getting the coffees, and going to beach towns. That's a real big intrigue and
Yeah,
see what it's like. But there is a tiny bit
yeah,
of I'm trying to chase that like 2013 Bangkok trip where no
yeah,
smartphones, don't know
yeah,
what the
yeah.
hell's going
Oh,
on.
Bangkok was yours. Huh? That
Yeah,
was your
yeah,
eye opener.
yeah,
Bangkok was yours. Yeah. That
yeah.
also a scary city for the first timer. Yeah.
Also, let's not coat this as like a different era, but smartphones are a real thing, right? You know, before you mentioned 92, 93. I mean, that bloody hell, that's before internet. But
Yeah.
even 2013, when I went, smartphones were just coming in, but they weren't as widely used as today. So that's a big thing because now, if I get stuck and I've got an eSIM, I can at all costs just check out Google, right?
You can always find out where you're standing on the map.
Yeah,
You can call your friend at home and say, "Will you go online and tell me where I'm in Myanmar. Tell me which way I go, left or right."
yeah,
It's wonderful because it allows us to do these things without the sense of fear. But those of us who knew what life was like before then, is the sense of like anything else, the nostalgia, what was lost, which is very much youth.
yeah. Youth, and I guess you can't underestimate the age factor, right? You do get older and then more experienced. That's just
And then
life.
you asked before, am I still chasing that? Yes and no, because I still travel all the time. But now, I'm 57. My husband is in quite the adventure travel as I am. I go in groups of holidays. So we very much want to just go, rent a place in Crete for 2 weeks with an
Mm,
infinity pool overlooking Knossos,
yeah.
and then maybe go for an hour and come back for cocktails. Because after a while, you want to be comfortable. So there's a certain stages in your life. I'm glad I did it when I was 23. Because at 53, I'm not sure it's quite as comfortable living in a 2-star hotel somewhere, in a shithole in Guatemala with a mariachi band playing right out in front of your room. So as you get old, your standards do increase.
Is there a country you travel to later in life that you kind of wish you went to when you're younger, just because you can imagine what it might have been like back in the day?
It's a very good question. Someone asked me recently if I've ever had any disappointing travels, and there's no country that I wish I hadn't gone to because you always find something. But I guess one country that my vision was let me down and what I wanted was Vietnam.
Oh,
I had been
interesting.
there. This is like 15 years ago, so I can only imagine it's changed since then. But of course, Vietnam to Americans is like India to you guys. We have this attachment because we screw the country up so badly. So
Yeah,
there's deeper implications about what Vietnam means to an American. But even beyond the war years, it always struck me like a North Korea or an Iran, a place that you could never go to because it was verboten and it was off limit. So I always imagine it's a beat or two behind culturally, which of
yeah,
course is rubbish because they move on. They just don't talk to us about it.
yeah.
So, but I went to Vietnam. I was very disappointed in how commercial it was. We were
Mm,
walking ATMs. Everything was very much about what can they sell you and what shop they can take you in. And I had wanted Myanmar, which I'd been to a few years before, Burma, which is totally off the beaten
yeah,
path, one of my
yeah,
favorite
yeah.
countries because it's so fucking repressive. It's like you can't get in there, so therefore, really are walking into the past. I was expecting that from Vietnam, and what I saw in Vietnam was a culture that very much righted itself and figured out capitalism and figured out how to commoditize. You can do tours of the DMZ Bridge, which is all a construction because the DMZ Bridge was blown up by the Viet Cong in 1969 or whatever.
Yeah.
It's all games, it's all smoke and mirrors. And I was deeply disappointed by my experience and wondered what had been 10 years like earlier. I got there too late.
So you said 15 years ago. Yeah, I went in 2013. And the thing I remember the most about maybe other people's perceptions was there's a group of American guys on our tour to Halong Bay, and they obviously just landed and straight on the coach, right? So I'm getting their first reactions to what they're seeing on the road, and it generally is. And these guys are quite young, but like they're generally saying, "Oh wow, they've got like houses like we have at home. They've got high-rise buildings like we got at home. They couldn't believe
Yeah.
how, I don't know what you say, but just how built up it is. It's just a normal country. It's not like maybe what you read about or hear about from 40 years ago. So they were shocked probably as much as you were in terms
Yeah.
of they figured it out.
And I think it's because certainly as an American, we didn't talk about it. We had no cultural ties. We automatically assumed if America did give you aid, then you were stuck in, the Middle Ages and you couldn't possibly progress. Well, there's proof positive that other people give aid and they can create their own world. So I think a lot of it was that idea, that thinking because it was off our view screen, therefore it didn't progress at all. So Vietnam very much is that place. Oh no, this country has done just fine without us. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It reminds me that the world does go on, and that what we want to see on a holiday sometimes that doesn't compete with what people who live there want to see and what they expect. They want progress. They want the march of time. We want a holiday snap that we can show our friends and say, "There's the pyramid. Don't look at the McDonald's sign behind it.
Yeah, exactly.
Instead, right?"
Yeah, Vietnam's an interesting one. It's actually an easy place to travel. It goes in the easy list. Yeah.
It does. Exactly. And look, and I mean, the Vietnamese were lovely. I mean, they were very hard sell, but I did the same thing in India and Egypt and Africa and places too. But I was just expecting something that was more sort of antiquated and more exotic. And in my mind, it wasn't. Myanmar was, and parts of Laos and North Cambodia and stuff were more so than Vietnam. Vietnam is very much right itself has become very commercialized.
Yeah, and I think Laos was an interesting one. I had no idea what that country was about before I went, so that was completely new. I took that bus from northern Vietnam to Laos, which takes like 8 hours.
I did that too. Yeah. Oh, those chicken buses move on so slowly, and then they'll stop in the middle of nowhere. You don't know why. It's because like some local guy, is someone's delivering toothpaste to his house or whatever. So they'll wait for a half hour so some guy can come on and collect his groceries or something. It's a wonderful thing. And obviously patience is so important. And I tell so many of my friends who do not travel that way that one thing you need, particularly in the Middle East or Southeast Asia, is a bucketload of patience, because things are not going to move on your clock.
Same as South Asia. So like Nepal, for example, when it's a bit further middle, but their roads are horrendous. So if it's 120 miles, it's going to take 12 hours, right? Because they stop every hour. It is long. You just need to keep it together. Try and just stay calm.
And just recognize this is part of it. Part of the thrill is understanding what a chicken bus in Nepal is like. on your GPS map, it only says 60K.
Yeah, I know,
So why did it take 12 hours?
Yeah, Google's telling me 2 hours, but we're 4 hours in. Yeah,
exactly.
Strange.
I can go to Philadelphia in 90 minutes. Why does it take me so long to get from one part of Nepal to the other?
But I tell you, you mentioned Middle East. We went there last year. That was a new area of the world for me. Apart from Lebanon, which was an interesting experience, the rest of the countries I went to were very, very well done in terms of the roads. It was like clockwork, which maybe wasn't a shock, but I was like, oh, wow, you can travel quite easily here in terms of the roads if you're driving, road tripping, or getting buses.
I don't know how long you've been traveling, but we all kind of look back. I do think the road systems everywhere have probably gotten better because there's more travelers going to these places. I think of Costa Rica as having the worst roads in the world. And yet Costa Rica now is a paradise for middle-class Americans, and everything is paved. I was down there last year for the first time in 10 years. And first trip, entire buses could disappear in potholes, and now it's just smooth as ice.
Yeah.
So I think because obviously these countries, I think part of it comes back to what we're talking about, where the world has opened up in a way where it's easier to travel these places. So people are traveling to Cambodia, and they're traveling to Costa Rica, and they're traveling to Indonesia, and places they wouldn't otherwise, because it's so much simpler to do. All you do is go on and book a ticket. So I think the infrastructure has risen because of that. Certainly roads and airports and things like that, they have changed so exponentially when I first started traveling.
I'd say at least you have that experience because you traveled in the early 90s, right? So you've got best of both worlds where you just know before and after, where I think for me, most of it has kind of been pretty easy with that sort of stuff,
It's all about timing, I think. And I was going to mention documentary because one of the things I emulate, one of the things I would love to have done, I tried to make a documentary about this, but I couldn't sell it because the time was right after 9/11, the timing is wrong. But it's always been fascinating about the old Hippie trail.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And the overland route to Asia. You start at the pudding shop in Istanbul, you get a magic bus, You get rid of your money and you slowly work your way overland to Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, and then into Goa or Kathmandu. So before I went network and started working for Discovery and BBC and all those places, I made an independent film and I was trying to sell it. So I flew to Kathmandu and I flew to Goa, interviewed some people who took the hippie trail and never returned.
Yeah.
And a few of them, they're pretty space cakey, selling crystals or selling weed they bought in Sri Lanka, whatever. They weren't necessarily the most upstanding citizens, but they found the most.
Yeah.
And I became fascinated about what it would have been like to recreate the old hippie trail. Now, this is before, I was born in 1966, so this is before my time. Before I was aware these countries existed, the road was already closed. By 1979, you have what? You have the Iranian Revolution. You have the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. You have the Kashmir War. Everything closes. So that window of the road to Kathmandu was only 10 years. But what those people, what that generation before us had was they saw a world that only existed for 10 or 12 years, where East met West, and they were embracing. It was before the Ayatollah. It was before Saddam. It was before the Soviets and the Americans and the Taliban, and all this stuff happened. And the stories I hear from people who took the trip, it was so transformative that many didn't return. I would love to retrace those steps and meet some of these people if they're still alive. I mean, it's so long now, it's hardly possible. But they went up the mountains in Nepal and, following the Beatles to Rishikesh, or they started making rugs in Tehran and never came back. They find themselves in this world that those two worlds came together in was essentially a very, very peaceful way before it all went to shit. What those people would have seen compared to what I saw in my generation and your generation is so much different.
Yeah. In India, this must have been somewhere in Delhi, but we met two French ladies, and this was like 8 years ago, and they're in their 70s, I think, and they're meeting back to where they were when they'd done the hippie trail, right? They're like in their mid-70s, they're laughing and joking, they speak good English, and they were talking to us about this hippie trail where they drove from Paris east. And we just couldn't believe what we're hearing. Exactly what you just said about, back then before 1979, you can just drive through. Everyone's friendly, no problems. People help you out. The amazing things that I saw.
Afghanistan was supposed to be Shangri-La. They invited, they waited for you on the border with like bags of opium and said, "Welcome, my friend." It was that kind of paradise. And yet things changed so much. And what's fascinating to me, at least, is I think it might resonate greater in Western Europe and England, but in the States, no one's ever heard of the hippie trail. Because it was never really documented. People didn't take cameras and things, so people didn't make films. So it was a phenomenon, very brief, that disappeared. It didn't really have any great resonance. A lot of people came back and got their job at the bank and forgot about it. But to me, I remember I was in Peshawar years ago, outside of Peshawar in Pakistan, and this was again 2002 or 2003 or whatever, when I was doing a film over there. And one of the locals, talking about the hippie trail, one of the locals said, "Oh, you should see the hippie graveyard." And they took me up this mountain pass where there used to be an ashram. And there were about 100 or so graves of all Westerners. Jim Simmons, Carlos Swanson or whatever. These kids that died, mostly probably from overdose or drug abuse or whatever.
Right.
Because your demons will follow you to these places. But here's an entire graveyard of young American kids, probably in their 20s or 30s, that just didn't make it back. It's a whole story that's untold. Good and bad. It's not known.
Wow, that would make the nostalgia a bit more realist, right?
Yeah, it's not all fantasy, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's, you had to trust yourself, because I talked to people when I did the documentary, the trailer. I talked to people who did it, and people died along the way of their own devices, or one guy pissed off a warlord in Afghanistan, or maybe it was Iran, and his friend got beheaded. I mean, those things happened out there. But it wasn't like the world we know today. And the place that I love more than anything else is the Middle East. Egypt is my happy place. And I do love Syria and Jordan and Iran, but Egypt particularly. And I love the Middle Eastern culture and the Arab sensibility. And those are all the things that we certainly don't hear about growing up. We think they're all just out to destroy us, and that they're all just, either Islamic fundamentalists, or they're all living in the 1200s. It's simply not true.
Absolutely not true.
They're some of the most wonderful, embracing people in the world. And I just adore that part of the world. So I try to bring that into my books and my films as much as I can. I try to focus. When I go to Egypt, for example, I do a lot of shows in Egypt. I'll focus on the Egyptologist, and then I'll focus on the experts, whether they're restoring the Sphinx or they're doing some some work done in Luxor from Khartoum, but I always try to find the locals as well and try to have an Egyptian voice too, which I get the locals because they're the ones that mean something, the ones that connect to the land, and every potsherd they found is from their ancestors. And it's just like it'd be wrong not to tell their story.
Yeah, I'm the same as you. I try to podcast when I travel with locals. I'm trying to find some who are willing to come on the podcast and talk about their local area, what we should do, shouldn't do if we're a tourist and stuff like that, just to get the real word of mouth, really, because you can read so many books about it or blogs, but you can't really know unless you speak to the local people. It's the only way.
Exactly. They will look at that book and say, "Oh, they're still telling that story from 1962."
Yeah. And the hippie trail, I went to Rishikesh because I had to go to the Beatles ashram.
Right.
That's the only reason I went there.
I didn't go there. I did a show on it years ago. At Science Channel. It was like it's all derelict now and tumbling down. It's totally abandoned, right? So it's the moment in time.
That's a hippie place, Rishikesh. You got those classic Westerners just staying there doing yoga every day.
Exactly.
Interesting place. Okay, we didn't actually get back to your early life. Was there travel interest when you were younger before you went on your trip to England?
England was, again, I think, any sort of like sheltered kid who watches too much PBS and, growing up on Monty Python and episodes of the Avengers or whatever, England to me was like, oh my God, that's as far flung as I can go. And I loved it. I studied there in film. But how I got into the Middle Eastern history was really purely by accident because I knew I wanted to be a filmmaker. I was always enamored of film, cinema, narrative films. I grew up on all the epics, Lawrence Arabia, The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. Those are my go-to movies.
Good, Bad, the Ugly. One of my favorites.
Oh, Good, the Bad, the Ugly is a flawless movie. I could just sit here and watch it. You can start playing it now, and I'd shut up and just watch it. It's that good. And again, what Leone does is he takes you into this world of the Civil War, and it's just amazing how transportive it is. But that was my love of history and exotic locations. It was all very much in feature films. But then I got my master's or undergrad degree in filmmaking in the late 80s from Temple University in Philadelphia. And then I moved to New York thinking that I would become Martin Scorsese overnight. And that didn't happen. I was a poor schlub on a walkie-talkie on a grip truck at 2 a.m. so they didn't steal it somewhere in the bowels of Queens. And I clearly was a bit disillusioned. I was not exactly skyrocketing to the top. And I was lucky to have that work because many times I didn't have work at all. So without any money, I would go to the New York Public Library because it was air conditioned and it was free. And one day, out of boredom or out of curiosity, I picked up a book off the shelf about early Neolithic humans or the rise of Neolithic culture, which I did not get into my small Catholic town in Pittsburgh, PA. And some penny dropped. There was something about that book that I did not know about this world, about how civilizations started, that I resolved to teach myself civilization, through the New York Public Library. And I had a lot of time on my hands. So I did that for months and months. And then when I finally got to Egypt, when I finally got to the Nile Valley and Mesopotamia, I got stuck. I became so fascinated by those great civilization cultures. I just said, screw it. I'm not going to wait, for the phone not to ring. So I hopped a flight over to the Middle East. I flew to Tel Aviv. We heard that kind of story. I picked up there down to Cairo with my friend, did 2 weeks in Cairo. And then he flew home because he had a job and I didn't. And then I backpacked through Turkey, Iran, Syria, Jordan, Israel, and for about 4 or 5 months until the money ran out. And I was in the clouds. When I came back, when I finally realized I have to go back and actually do something, I resolved to find a way to get back here that will pay for it.
Yeah.
Documentary film. So I went back and got my master's degree in documentary cinema with an emphasis on history. And I made my thesis film on the Great Sphinx of Egypt. And I knew some people on the Antiquities Board through some colleagues. And I went over there with student equipment and just bummed around the Sphinx for a while and watched the people restore it. And it was just eye-opening. And then I was able to sell that to the Discovery Channel, which is pretty good for a 22-year-old kid who's making his thesis film. I actually sold it to TV. Yeah. So I've been doing it ever since. So basically, I chased that idea of travel. It has informed my life in such phenomenal ways that I wouldn't be here talking to you now, certainly as a TV producer or a novelist, if it wasn't for just saying, screw it, I'm going to go do it. And I backpacked and I found a way. I was fortunate. I certainly had help and timing was right. And I think the film also was good, but I was able to parlay that into a career where ever since then, by and large, the networks have been paying for me to go on these places.
And you mentioned you're going to Turkey next week, pre-recorded. What I
Yeah.
noticed when I went to Turkey last year was that the Anatolian Museum was pretty cool.
Is that the one in Ankara?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. I've not been there in years. I love that place. Shadow Hayek and all those early cultures. I
Yeah.
need to get back out there and see that. Yeah, I absolutely adore it. Yeah. Turkey's one of my favorite places. Yeah. And again, I went to Shadow Hayek. I did a show about there years ago. And Gebelteak, how do you say it? Gebelteak, I say it wrong, but you know about it. It's like, it's a archaeological site older than Stonehenge that is one of the earliest clocks. It's 10,500 years old. They just found that in the last 15 years and just tells you how long civilizations have been around. I love those moments in culture and history. Was the first time. People ask me why Egypt do you love so much. But they did it first. And they did it so outrageously big. You look at the bloody pyramids, look at Saqqara, you look at the tombs in the Valley of the Kings, like, what they were thinking, how they pull this off.
Yeah.
And the Romans were fine, but the Romans were all just a bunch of engineers and they were all blueprints and they had a bunch of slaves from Nubia doing it. The Egyptians had gods and demons and this sense of otherworldliness. Not that I believe there's anything going on except for hard work by humankind. But that's why I love those first cultures, like the Anatolia Museum or whatever. Someone created cities.
Yeah.
Someone created the first mayor, whatever it is. It's like, oh my God, to have been there to see that stuff. That's what drives me today. It may not necessarily be going to a city or a place that I haven't been to before, because after a while, I wouldn't say it gets samey, but you start comparing, again, Honduras to Myanmar for ridiculous reasons that are rolling in your head. But when I see some ancient ruin or some windswept site on a hill somewhere, even in Ireland or whatever, I'm thinking, how did this happen? What happened here? The mystery there drives me to dig into it.
Yeah, so you mentioned a backpacking trip. So are you going to revisit some places on this Turkey trip?
Well, I've been to Turkey so many times, and I was just in Turkey 2 years ago. Again, with staying with friends in a very lovely pool and getting someone to drive us around. It's so lovely. We went to Ephesus, we went to Troy, that stuff. Ended up in Kosh for a very comfortable week. This trip, I've made 1,000 hours of television over 25 years, and I love the business. But I started having an itch to tell other stories in different ways. And nonfiction TV is a very different beast, of course, than fiction or anything you can play with the facts. You can fit it with the facts. So I started writing novels 4 or 5 years ago, 2 novels that I didn't sell, one about the Hippie Trail and one that all took place in ancient Egypt. And then the third novel finally got some legs, and that's called Primetime Travelers. And I think it worked because it takes both of my worlds, both of my careers, and blend them together. It's about a TV crew that travels through time. And it's more Neil Gaiman than it is hard history, because it's very cynical. It's making fun of the business and all the behind the scenes stuff, as well as going back to ancient Egypt, the Ramses the Great, the 12 gates of the underworld. The second book is about Pompeii, which comes out in September. So the same crew goes back, primetime Pompeii. And I know so much about that because I've made so many films about. I know what happened in Pompeii by the hour, when the pumice stones started to fall, when the earthquakes happened and the fires began, when the pyroclastic flow began at 6:15 a.m. on October 24th, 79 AD. I know all that shit in my head, but I want to weave it into a good, fantastical story. So they're there with drones and camera crews and a cheesy TV host that looks like an Indiana Jones wannabe from Burbank. So I'm taking all my cynical TV world and throwing it into the past and then in way over their head. And I wrote the first draft of that book by renting a little villa on the Bay of Naples, just a few subway stops from Pompeii. So I would get up every morning and I would make my coffee overlooking the bay, and then I would take a train into Pompeii and wander around and just write stuff down and come back, and I wrote that into my novel the next day. I fly by the seat of my pants. I don't outline anything. And I got the first draft done. It was still, a chunk of nonsense, but there was some good nuggets in there. So that is my MO going forward. So the third book is Primetime Troy. So I'm renting a villa, not in Troy, because as we know, Troy is a bit of a cesspool. It's pretty boring. I'm taking a place a bit further south, and I'm renting a little villa just by myself for a month, and a bunch of Greco-Roman ruins around, and I'm going to write. I have a copy of the Iliad, and I've got a copy of all the histories all ready to go. I have some experts that I know that's going to show me around some archaeological sites. Yeah. I'm just going to throw myself into that world and write that first draft. That's why I'm going to Turkey.
So your novels are combining sort of the truth in terms of history, but also your take on it in terms of what you've experienced in your career in TV.
Yes.
And it's kind of half serious, half jokey, right? Half and half.
Very much. Because once you get, once the pyroclastic flows coming down the mountain, it's no longer a comedy.
Yeah.
People do die in my books.
Yeah.
But, but it's not jokey, tongue-in-cheek comedy where it breaks the fourth role. It's about, I went out of my way to make sure the characters in my book, the four main crews, the cameraman, the director, the cheesy host, and the sound guy are all real people, and they all have a life outside the page. So I try to bring emotion to that because that's what makes a book work. You have to make sure you care about the characters. So some may die, some may live, and I very much want to make it emotional in that regard. But I also, because I'm able to graft the cynicism and the jokiness of today and of television onto the past. I mean, the first book is about them taking the 12 hours of the Duat, the underworld, looking for a lost mummy, following the boat of Ramses the Great. So clearly it's a total farce and a fantasy. But yet, all the 12 gates of the mythology, I meticulously researched and it's in that book. It just happens to be a cheesy host from Burbank, California, that has to get him to the next gate.
Okay. In terms of your TV career, what are some of the myths that maybe people think are probably like the real good things? You mentioned travel is obviously not sometimes as glorious. You're there to work essentially, but is there any other myths that maybe people think that it's a great line of work, but actually, do you know what? It's not as good as you think.
It's work, and particularly more and more so, budgets have shrunk and time has shrunk. So you're sent off to shoot an episode of a film, and you only have 4 or 5 days in the field to do it. And you got interviews, people would get all the way from the top of Egypt down to Luxor and back again. So you're working your butt off. And what that does is, and I think that surprises people the most, is these shows, at least the shows I do for Discovery and History and Geographic, they're all very heavily pre-scripted.
Oh.
So we're not flying by the seat of our pants. We are not making it up on the fly. We can't afford to. We know there's an expert that's going to meet us at the Cairo Museum at 12:15 on Tuesday. We have him until 1:15. These are the questions we have to ask. And this is the question he has to end with. So it throws to the next scene. And then we get the plane and go to the dig site in Cairo or in Luxor or whatever. We meet the expert that answers that question. And we know we need 3 things from him, the 3 mysteries we want. So we can shoot the other stuff and see the dig site, but we know at the end of the day, he has to ask a question that throws us to act 4. So it's all sort of a blueprint that you follow. Now, invariably, things change. Experts don't say the things you want to. Particularly if you're there for a tomb opening, you're there for an archaeological. I did a lot of shipwreck shows where they're diving in ROVs. You don't find it. Yeah, I did a bunch of Shark Week shows, which are more different, but you don't get sharks. So then you have to think on your feet. But that's 20% of it. At the end of the day, you have to go in the field with an approved shooting script by the network, and you can't really fall too far from that because that's what they hired you to do. That's where they put their money.
And how different is it now with the streaming services and social media and people's short attention span?
Oh, it's far worse across the board. It's far worse because so many people are out of work.
Yeah.
I mean, I lost my job at Discovery last year because my network, the Science Channel, went away. So me and 30 people all got pink slips last summer, as well as Animal Planet and many other networks, because the streaming services make it that many hours. So rather than making 4 or 5 nights on a grid of hours, you need 5 or 6 hours for your Netflix or for your HBO Max. So less product means less people to make it.
Yeah.
So camera people, shooters, sound people, fixers, all that stuff, we need far less of them. Showrunners. The budgets are smaller. They wait longer before they renew something. So thousands of people that I know are out of work across the industry. And this is scripted too. It's a dying industry in many ways. It might write itself in a way, but it's a shadow of its former self. It feels like we're inundated with programming when you flick on Netflix or Max. But think that 7 or 8 networks combined to like one row on your screen. So, an entire network has been reduced to one line on Netflix and all the jobs that go with it. And conversely, to your point, tastes have changed. And I can't argue about that because I recognize we can be the grumpy old men and say, why can't they make films like they did in 1802? What's wrong with them? Attention spans are shorter and people do not want to sit there and watch a 2-hour film. about the rise of the Bronze Age or whatever. They want to get it
Mm.
in and out in 10 minutes. Or shows about space. They want to get right to space and see the International Space Station. They don't want to spend 10 minutes of people on the ground in the Verite getting ready for it to blast up. All the stuff that we grew up with. So people are very, very impatient. And I think that's one of the hardest things as a creative person is to recognize, well, you can't teach them to be otherwise. People like what they like. And this is where
Mm.
people are today. Younger people, a 15-year-old kid is not going to enjoy what we told them in 1998. They're going to want a different storytelling. And one of the reasons why I went to novels, I think, because I can create a space and I can create things in a way where television no longer satisfies.
Where does YouTube fit into this?
YouTube's a very big thing. YouTube's very small. I mean, I do a bunch of YouTube videos for my books. You know, it's a lot of it is self-promotion stuff because one of the key things I do in both my books is I have a very strong gay angle because I'm gay and I want to tell positive stories about the ancient world. And one thing I realized as I do all these archaeological films is that times are often much better for same-sex unions than they were now, and certainly in the ancient Near East and such. So I want to tell those stories both with my characters and the past. But one thing I do to supplement that is I do a bunch of videos for Amazon or for YouTube and TikTok and Instagram, which is 2-minute videos about gay history. I just did one today. I just posted just before we talked about Julius Caesar. Was he gay or not? Mm-hmm. And I just kind of talk about these things and I set them up there and they get a lot of followers, a lot of curiosity. I try to make sure I give positive spins. But that's the attention span of a lot of the YouTube and that stuff is they want the smaller things, a little bit of information. But conversely, you don't have to be that fancy. You don't need drone shots and $1 million budgets. I have a green screen over here. I stand there and I shoot some images and I throw in a few pictures of Augustus Caesar in the background and it's out the door. So it's liberating in a way.
Is it a threat to TV though?
Oh, absolutely. Okay. TV, look, I don't know if you have younger nephews or kids or whatever, but you're talking about cable TV, they don't even know what it is.
Oh yeah, true. It's all YouTube for the younger nephews. Right?
Again, the one thing that I most successfully been working on the last couple of years of Discovery, as I mentioned, Shark Week, which you probably know is it's on right now. I think it just ended, and it's the biggest week of the network for Discovery. It's the highest profile, highest ratings, $1 million sum per hour or whatever. It's big stuff. You talk to someone under 20, they never heard of Shark Week.
Yeah.
Already, even the biggest week on the biggest network is fading from view. Something will replace these things. And so I don't believe that creativity and storytelling will go away. It's been around since Homer or cave paintings. But the stories that we grew up on are going to be told in a very different way. And whether we're the Luddites and follow or whether we join them and tell the stories the same way remains to be seen.
I wonder if social media will stay as well.
It's a good question. I don't know. Social media may get bored about. They won't have time for a 2-minute video about Julius Caesar. That may be too much time. You get a chip in the head and you can blink and you can see everything you want to know about Julius Caesar in a second and you can move on. I have no idea. Again, I feel like I'm embracing social media because in my new career as a novelist, I kind of have to, and that's a good way of getting marketing out. But it is not necessarily a language that speaks to me.
Yeah.
I think a lot of older storytellers. I like the old school stuff. So I can only imagine it will become antiquated too. And the kids being born today will look at Instagram and say, oh, that's grandpa shit.
God, makes you feel old. Has there been any dangerous locations that you've filmed in? Or hairy moments?
I've been lucky in that I've been lucky in that I've never really felt uncomfortable or felt like me or my crew was put at risk. I was arrested once in Spain, but that's only because we were diving illegally on a wreck with our film gear, and that kind of sucked. But no, I've been in some places that don't sound. People would think about Sudan and the Middle East and Iran as something that you shouldn't go to. But I've met nothing but wonderful people. I think they want to show you around. They want to invite you into their country. Of all the places I've been, the only time my film gear was stolen.
Yeah.
The only time a car was broken into and underwater housing and all our camera gear was stolen was in Windsor, England.
Oh, God.
We were coming from a dive on the English Channel. We stopped somewhere for sushi in Windsor because it was on the way back to London. Someone broke into our car in the car park and stole a bunch of shit.
Windsor's supposed to be posh. Oh.
Precisely. So I'm saying it can happen anywhere at any time. You just don't know. But luckily, I've never felt, inshallah, I've never been in a situation where I felt like my life was in danger. I really shouldn't be here. Either traveling as a tourist or traveling as a film crew. And as a film crew, of course, you recognize that you're sitting down with a lot of gear and stuff. Yeah. And the other time that the gear was stolen, I was doing a Geographic show years ago in Romania about the gypsies. And it was about Outcast, a show called Taboo. And we're talking about outcasts around the world. And we're talking about the poor gypsies of some small town in Romania that have been forced outside of their town. So we went over there. We found the people. We're going to do a film with them. And we went to scout the location. We came back and the gear was all gone. And the gypsies had stolen it. And they said, we'll give it back to you for this amount of money. And these are our protagonists. So I called Geographic in DC. They wired some money over. We went out.
Easy money, that is. Crikey.
Exactly. They're going to do that again.
Yeah.
Nothing.
They can believe it. And what about as a gay producer, though? I mean, do you have to be careful in some countries of your sexuality and stuff like that?
I certainly do. I don't talk about it a lot. I think as a Westerner, as we know, when we travel, we're given a pass because we're seen as somebody who kind of wanders in and wanders out, and we're not part of the culture. And I certainly don't pursue that when I go there. When I'm traveling with my husband or whatever, I'm not showing outward displays of affection, but I wouldn't do that as a straight couple either. It's just what I find more interesting than a threat to me is when I travel, particularly in the Middle East. I think of Turkey and I think of Iran. I think of southern Egypt. Is how often I get hit on by men. If I'm walking around alone, I get hit on all the time, and I can't say it's because of my shocking good looks. I'm just happen to be the man that's walking down the street, the white guy walking down the street from somewhere else. And what it says is the repression is there among the locals where they cannot be themselves. So they know they can hit on the decadent Westerner that's going back to New York in a few days because there's no residue there. They then know that we'll be interested because we have no shame. Or they also know there's no knock-on effect. And I find it deeply sad because you can tell in the eyes a lot of these people, it's the only way they can kind of find any kind of affection and scratch that itch they very much want to, because I do know that the repression is real. It's really there. They certainly can tell their clan or their tribe or their people that they're gay. I have friends in Cairo and friends in Damascus that are very Western, and so are their parents, and they're gay and they come out. But it's not like over here. You have to very, very be careful. There's entrapment in Cairo. A friend of mine who's Egyptian, who's gay, and he's out. He luckily wised up before it happened. They have entrapment on Grindr, which is one of the gay apps, a hookup app. And people will say, "Oh, let's meet you at the coffee shop or whatever," and it's the police. And they shake you down. They put you in prison. They show that they're actually doing something for Allah or whatever, the governor or the imam or whatever. And it's just a way to just basically. It's the right, probably no different than the right over here in the States too. It's those people can very much rule and they want to bow to them. But to long answer your question, but no, I've been fortunate where I've never felt threatened or ostracized or hated for being gay. Again, I don't necessarily promote it, but I do see the repression all the time and the people that very much would love to be on a flight back to New York with me so they could love who they want to love.
Hey, yeah, just a quick one. I just want to say there are many ways to support this podcast. You can buy me a coffee and help support the podcast with $5. Or you can go to my merch store with the affiliate link with TeePublic, where there's plenty of merch available to buy, such as t-shirts, jumpers, hoodies, and also some children's clothing. Thirdly, which is free, you can also rate and review this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podchaser, or Good Pods. Also, you can find me on social media on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. Simply just search for Winging It Travel Podcast and you'll find me displaying all my social media content for traveling, podcast, and other stuff. Thank you. God, someone mentioned the same similar story actually to you. But he is straight, but he said he got hit on a few times. Could be in taxis, could be whatever really. And he was quite surprised and taken aback by that because these are in the same sort of countries where you wouldn't really expect it.
it wasn't like they knew I was gay. I don't have a
Yeah.
sign on my head saying
Yeah,
gay,
exactly.
gay,
Yeah, yeah.
gay. So I'm
Yeah.
sort of trying at everything, a law of averages, and eventually some guy somewhere. It wasn't me either that picked up on it, but clearly, and I do think it's because of the sense there's nothing to lose necessarily with the Westerner
Yes, of
because
course.
they're part of our world, so they'll try with anybody, and I do
Yeah.
that, and it's probably true. I mean, we have a much more loose moral code than some of these more conservative countries sexually, and in terms of who we can love and how we show our affection. So they probably figure it's worth a shot. For every 10, there might be one.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, yeah. I don't blame them. Yeah, yeah. You traveled to over 70 countries or maybe just 70. What three are your favorites?
I always hate these questions because it's all about the time of the day. Certainly Egypt is the top because Egypt has my heart. Egypt has a special place. It's given me so much, both of my first films and that's where I was when I recognized how much I love that part of the world. I love places. I'm always attracted more to places that have the great archaeological sites
Mm,
as well as the culture that can blend the two. So, I'm less interested in the Tokyos that are all steamy metropolises and the New Zealand, which is nothing but windswept mountains. They're both lovely, but I need a mix. So let's see. So I'd say I very much loved Burma,
yeah.
Myanmar, whatever they're calling it today, particularly because of Bagan and
Again.
Mandalay and some of
Yeah.
those sites. Yeah. Have you been to Bagan?
Yes. Probably one of my favorite areas in the world.
Yes. It's phenomenal, right? And
Unbelievable.
it's hard to believe we don't know about it. It should be as well known as the Tower Bridge or
Mm,
the Eiffel Tower. It should be iconic in terms of what people think about as cultural touchstones, and no one knows about Bagan. It's
I know.
amazing. And when I
Yeah.
was there, again, partially it's because of the government, but I had so much of that stuff to myself. The people were friendly. The food was amazing. It was gorgeous and tranquil. I love the feel of Buddha. I'm not a
Yeah.
spiritual person. I was raised
Same.
Catholic.
Exactly the
But
same.
when you're in that part of the world,
Yeah.
you walk into a Buddhist temple, there's a reclining Buddha, and you hear the
Yeah.
birds chirping, and it's open to the jungle. There's something very inviting about that, unlike the Notre Dame on its flying buttresses or a mosque that's all hidden in darkness. It's inviting as part of the landscape. So I clearly love that part of the world. And I think I have a great affection for Peru too. Not
Oh,
just
yeah.
Machu Picchu, but I think the landscape of Peru and Cusco is just fairy tale beautiful. And I can go back there every time. I never get tired of that.
Cusco is one of my favorite cities or towns. Yeah. Love that
You
place.
get it, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
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 And
Yeah.
it's a tourist town in a way, but it doesn't matter because it's just so transporting, isn't it?
Oh, it's just a bit of a dream. But
Yeah.
Bagan, if people, I know right now is an interesting situation. Not sure if it's the best time to go to Myanmar. If you can, just get an e-bike or a scooter to drive around Bagan.
Yeah. I do not know what the situation is now. Even when I did it, this is 15 years ago, I went through, maybe you just do, I bought a ticket in Phnom Penh and did a puddle jumper over to, what's the capital, Rangoon, and then did it. And then came back because you don't want to give money to the people, the junta that's in charge.
Yeah.
It's tough because invariably money is going to go in their pocket. So it's definitely a moralistic choice as well as it is. But if anyone has wanderlust and they want to see something that they won't see anywhere else, Burma is the place.
And for Egypt, do you think people are scared to travel there?
They always are Egypt, always.
I get the impression that people are a bit nervous about going there, but they find it
Like I've been
edgy or
there.
not sure how to do it.
I've been there, I don't know, a dozen times, 15
Mm.
times or some over the years, and there's never a friggin' good time to go to Egypt. Just like you said, like I wouldn't go to East New York myself right now tonight. East New York's never going to not be East New York.
Yeah.
So I think it all depends on what your risks are. But I always tell people, if you wait for things to settle down, you'll never see the pyramids, and then things are fine. Nothing is ever 100% safe, but I guarantee you, all the places I've been to, I've never had any issues. You fly in, the security is great. Yeah, you got the hassle of getting around, but it is a very inviting, open country. And they very much want to make sure that you are taken care of. So like when I'm on my shoots or even when on holiday, I took a bunch of friends, went with a bunch of friends there a few years ago, and there were probably a group of 6 or 7 of us. And they always have an armed guard with you when you're seeing the pyramids or whatever. A
Mm.
group of 4 or more will have a security guard, which is strange because you don't really need it. And usually it's an 18-year-old kid with an AK-47. And so
Yeah.
I'm not sure how safe it is having this charming but pimply kid with a big gun in front of you on the van. But I guess it tells them that we value you and nothing's going to happen to you. It's always a good time to go to Egypt.
That's a strange vibe that we had that in Lebanon where we sat down to have some Lebanese pizza in this restaurant on the street, and then this guy with his family next to us had a gun just hanging by his belt, right? I'm like, oh, is this a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah,
You just got to go with
yeah.
it.
And you don't want to ask. You do not
Yeah,
want to butt in
yeah,
and
yeah.
have.
Yeah,
Just
no questions.
stay on your table. I'll stay on mine.
Yeah,
I'll mind my P's and Q's. You do that too.
yeah. Smell, eat your pizza, say hello, you'll be fine.
Right. Never wait to travel. If you want to travel someplace, go.
Yes,
That's my moral there.
yeah, and I think because of where we live and the media coverage, there are some certain areas of the world where I
No
guess people
question.
are a bit more hesitant, should we say, to maybe
Yeah.
take that leap. You are now a novelist. I know you mentioned it before.
I am now.
So why did you transition out of
Mhm.
TV to be a novelist?
I think so. What we touched on a bit before, I want to tell stories in a different way after so many years. I love documentary. It's in my soul. But I also, after all my travel and all my experiences, just want to have some fun. I want to lighten up a little bit. And I know it wouldn't be something serious. I don't want to write, Shuggy Bane or whatever. I want to write, something that's light and fun and effervescent. But I want to take all my stories and tell something. But I remember when I started writing the first novel, two things happened. It was 2016, where I've been talking about. I had a novel in my head about ancient Egypt for years, and my husband got sick of hearing about it. Just friggin' do it. And then I remember in 26 two things happened early in the year that made me change that. One, I turned 50, and I realized, well, holy shit, there's less years behind me or ahead of me than back. And then two, my great hero, David Bowie, died. And I grew up with Bowie. Bowie was just, every album was a new world. And I couldn't wait for the next one. You always challenged me and take me to this place. Even though I knew every disc he ever put out, when I read his obituary, it reminded me how fearless the guy was, that he had no problem reinventing himself and taking risks and jumping off a cliff on each and every album for 26 albums. And I'm thinking, I hate David Bowie, but if he can do it 26 times, I can freaking do it once.
Yeah.
I'm going to write this damn novel.
Yeah. It's a great
And
outlet.
I did.
Yeah.
And I, it was a struggle, and I realized I had to teach myself a new way of storytelling, because all the stuff I learned as a TV producer, some of it helps in terms of cause and effect, signposting and cliffhangs and all the stuff that works in television. But it's a different language. So I had to teach myself the literary, the internal stuff, the point of view. I had to start from scratch. And it was exhilarating and frustrating at the same time. And the first one I think was good, but I wasn't able to sell because it was too quirky. I wrote the one about the hippie trail a little closer. And finally, I think I found that magic stuff in my third book where I mentioned I mixed the two.
Yeah.
And I could bring out the humor that I have, because I think I have a very sharp sense of humor in my writing. And I couldn't do that when it's all historical pieces.
Yes.
So that one kind of opened up a different chance of me talking about the insider behind the scenes of television, but also all my love. And that's the one that I think that sort of caught the attention. That's why that one was published first. And that's why it's a series of books. So the Primetime Travelers will go back in ancient history time and time again to make films. And it will all be about epoch moments. Ancient Egypt, the second was Pompeii, the third one is Troy. I have no idea where it'll go from there. But it's nice and returnable, and it's fun. And I can kind of get lost in this stuff and hopefully tell a fun yarn that's like the beach read, but you got to learn some stuff. You're going to pick up a book and it's going to be a romp. But at the end of the day, you'll know about how Pompeii exploded.
Yeah, that's like the perfect combo, right?
If you're looking for that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think history is important, but I guess especially younger generation, they do get bored, don't they?
Yeah.
So you need to entertain them in the middle part somewhere, or at least in the middle of the sentence or whatever,
What I did learn from television really helpful in all my books, if we were to read one, they never slow down. Again, I have the emotional stuff, but there's always someone plotting. You always have two or three things going on. Very much like a film, very much like a TV show. If you watch a show and there's always three or four stories, they're like cross-cutting and different POVs. It's sort of cinematic in that way. So I wouldn't say it's relentless, because that sounds exhausting, but there's never a quiet moment. And at the end of the day, like my shows, they're meant to entertain and educate at the same time.
Next question might be, I don't know if it's a difficult question, but let's take the passion away for a second. And monetary wise, going away from TV must be quite a big decision, because I can imagine it pays quite well. So was that a big
Well,
decision?
yeah. I'm making like $6.50 writing novels or whatever. The turnaround pay is not much, and I still do work in television as a freelancer, even though I
Okay.
work with the networks. I just finished a project for History Channel.
Yeah.
I'm after Turkey, which I'm definitely off the clock. I'll come back and I'll hit up my friends and say I'm home. And of course, if that job comes along and the VP job that pays so well, it's going to be hard to say no to it because I still want to buy that beach house somewhere along the Mediterranean,
Yeah, of
when I
course. Yeah.
retire. So I'm not ready to like teeter off in poverty just yet. But I need to find a way to have those two loves dovetail. But I still enjoy television. It's not like I gave one up for the other. I just wanted to tell stories in a different way as well. And it's true, television books do not sell. Or books do not pay. The money you make after all the cost of marketing and book design and all that stuff, I can buy a good pizza in Sorrento, but it'll still be a pizza.
Yeah, and the writers say this all the time, right? So where's the incentive in terms of, let's take the passion out of it because people love writing, but in terms of career, it seems like one of the hardest careers to get into is writing books.
It's foolish. It's foolish, My dad, God bless him, he's 89, and now he's still worried. I'm 57. You're looking for work, right? You're not going to do this novel stuff all the time, right? Yeah, don't worry, Dad. I got somebody saved. But literally, he thinks I'm a 16-year-old kid again.
Yeah.
And in a way, I am, because it is sort of foolish. It's like I certainly didn't go into this for the cash. All my novel writing friends do not. Even the ones that get big book deals, by the time it comes out of it itself, there's no guarantee the next book comes out. I'm doing it right now because I love to do it. What happens a year or two from now, financially it becomes unfeasible when the books don't start making a bigger profit. I don't know, but I do know in a way that I feel like I've worked really hard in the networks and I made good money to networks being executive producer. So I'm not struggling, but I want to try something new. It reminded me when I went into filmmaking to begin with, it was for the sheer, talk about the saying that's some challenge of kind of like, the freedom of walking in a small town in Eastern Turkey and being free and being lifted off the ground. I kind of want that in a career sometimes too. It's like,
yeah.
It's easy to be stayed. So for now, I'm letting myself drift a bit and we'll see what happens. Yeah, hopefully my dad won't listen to this. He goes, I told you, I knew you weren't making any money. But why a podcast for you, if I can ask one more question? Because again, I can't imagine this is lucrative either. What does a podcast give you? Right.
No, not lucrative. Not a minute anyway. I think podcasts and books are probably the same, where the joke is, you can't make any money in it. I'm like, don't expect that. Yeah. YouTube maybe is because I do YouTube as well, right? I do YouTube for my travels. That's a different beast, but also it's a beast that you can have some markers to hit. You get your subscribers, you get your hours in.
Right.
Press yes on the making money. You get ads in. There's a path there, even though it's quite hard, but podcasting's a bit of a wild, wild west. Yeah.
Right.
I love speaking to people. Yeah. I love speaking to people. The worst bit about it is the editing and the organization of it. Yeah. This is the best bit, right? So.
Yeah. Don't you have somebody else to help you with that, or when we say goodbye, you didn't at all?
No, all myself.
Yeah, it's no fun. That's why all these, pitching myself for the books. I have my social media guys, 28-year-old kid who understands TikTok. And
Okay.
I just gave him a video today about Richard the Lionheart. He's going to post tomorrow.
Yeah.
I stood in front of a screen. I gave my scripts. I sent them to him, and he will post it. He will add the music. He will cut it. He will find an image of Richard the Lionheart and put it up there for me. I just can't be bothered with that shit anymore.
I don't blame you. Yeah. I think the first thing I can do when I outsource stuff would be something like that, right? Social media or editing. Yeah. It's
intuitive to them.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I tried to combine travel and podcasting last year. A lot of lessons learned, a lot of interesting things. So I'm taking those into the future, and next year will be interesting, I think. If you want areas of the world, I don't know if this would be any interest to you. There's like 3 areas of the world for my trip last year. I went to 20 countries, and the ones that still get downloads, like loads per week, is places like Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan. They're the 3 that just seems to resonate really well.
That's fascinating to know.
Yeah.
I wonder if they're all living in Taiwan who do that, or if there's people in, Sioux Falls, Iowa that are fascinated by it.
No one from those countries listening, so it's
got to be elsewhere.
Yeah.
You never know until you do it. I know that, Discovery Channel or whatever, we had a list of like historical time periods that we would do or wouldn't do. Or Animal Planet had a list of like dogs rate but cats don't.
Right.
What is it? It's like birds rate, but horses don't, or something. There actually is a do and a don't list before you put money into something. Civil War rates, but the Revolutionary War doesn't. World War II rates, but World War One doesn't.
Oh,
So
okay.
friggin' arbitrary, but there's a list
Yeah.
somewhere, the
Yeah.
master list. That
Yeah.
and there's money behind it, so it's usually pretty evergreen too. I don't
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
it, but
And in terms of YouTube, because I've started that recently, right? So I've kind of post travels, gone into like my archives and created a script and stuff like that, right? So the countries or places that get really high traction are Paris, Venice, the classic travel places.
right.
So the two places recently is Beirut. I guess it's topical because I went there
Right.
last
Open
year.
again.
Yeah,
Right.
and then Carpathos Island in Greece, which no one's heard of. So I guess people are trying to search
Nor
for
have
those
I.
Greek islands that no one's heard of. So if you look on a map
Oh,
between Crete and Rhodes, there's a island called
okay.
Carpathos, and that's there. Well worth visiting.
I've never heard of it. I've never heard of it. Have you been there?
Yeah, yeah. Went there on my own for
Oh,
two
yeah.
weeks. Loved
Okay.
it. Yeah,
Okay. All right. Okay. Wow. Okay.
recommend it. Yeah, yeah. Okay, we're coming towards the end. I've got a couple more questions, and then we'll delve into
Sure.
my quickfire travel questions. I've
Mhm.
got here any travel plans apart from Turkey this year, going into next year.
Um, I mean, Turkey certainly is the big one. When I get back, my husband and I will head over to Berlin because we like to do he's a big art guy. We're going to go see the Franz Hall show that's open there. So we'll zip over there for a week and
Yeah.
hang out in Berlin, which is a fun city. But that's probably it for this year. We usually go away on a holiday, but again, since I'm no longer getting the big paycheck from Discovery, it may be Newark, New Jersey this year.
Yeah, yeah. Darien, Connecticut, maybe.
Exactly.
Okay. Oh, yeah. That reminds me. Do you know the place up in New York State called New Paltz?
Oh yeah, I've been in New Paltz. I
Yeah,
have a
we went
friend
there
who
last year on a road trip. We thought it was a
Yeah.
hippie town, and it is. It's pretty hippie.
Well, yeah, it is more hippie than if you've been to Woodstock next door.
Yeah,
That's all
Bethel
fake
Woods.
hippie. That's
Okay.
all that's shopping mall, hippie, the kind of shit you would buy somewhere in a mall in Cleveland. So the sun is definitely set on Woodstock. So New Paltz is a better place.
Ah, interesting. Okay. I love both because I'm a Hendrix fan, so I went to Bethel Woods.
Oh,
Had
yeah,
to go. Yeah. Lastly, where can people find you? Any social media, any LinkedIn, any websites?
Yeah. My book is on Amazon.com, Primetime Travelers, and I'm at NeilLaird.com. You can sign up for my newsletter there. And then I do these videos on gay history because it ties in with the book, gay_history at TikTok and Instagram. I think it's ancient gay history or something there. So Facebook author. So all the usual places.
Yeah.
You Google Neil Laird or Primetime. I'll pop up somewhere.
I'll put the links in the show notes so people can click on those.
That'd be brilliant. Thanks. Anybody that does, read the book, the great thing about writing these books quickly is the same characters. I love to hear from people what they think about where they want to see the characters go. I'm about to go to Turkey to write book 3. So what do you think about Kara, the camera woman, and Derek, the host? So if anyone does read, don't be afraid to track me down and give me thumbs up or thumbs down on what they like, they don't like, because it is always evolving and always moving. And I love that engagement.
Okay, awesome. Righty-ho, got some quick fire travel questions. These are normally some of your favorite things worldwide. I've already heard you don't like favorite things, so it's going to be interesting. It's travel question time. We mentioned your 3 favorite countries, but if you were to go to 2 or 3 tomorrow that are new places in the world, and there's no rules, you can go anywhere. What 3 countries are you going to go to?
I still haven't been to the stands. I would love to see the stands. There's countries, the steppes. The place that I would always love to go to and never will, of course, because of history and time, is Afghanistan. I have a great affection for the Afghan history, and I'm fascinated by it. Probably when I was writing the Hippie Trail book and hearing about people who went there, I would love to see some of those remnants of what's there. But of course, such a war-torn, ugly place now that I can't imagine I'll go. But that certainly is one of those places. It's always been high on my list. I say probably somewhere in Central Africa I haven't been to. I'm just looking at the places on the map that I haven't been to yet and just see if I can sort of discover that young kid again somewhere in the jungles of Congo.
Yeah. Okay. And what about 3 favorite cuisines worldwide?
I mean, I think I mentioned before, I think the Burmese food, those noodles and peanut sauce, I think the best food I ever had every day when I was in Burma was just phenomenal. And it was like 2 pennies. Everything was just so fresh and so tender. So I could live that kind of food all the time. I love my Middle Eastern food. I love my olive oils and my kofta kebab. So I'm always happy to plop my butt down somewhere in a Cairo in a cafe in Cairo or Lebanon or whatever. My favorite recent probably because I spent a month in Naples, so that pizza was
Oh,
good.
Italian food. I
Yeah,
mean, you can't beat it.
that's an easy one, but it's like,
I
oh,
know
I'll
it's a popular
throw in an
one.
easier one. But yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, if you could sit anywhere in the world with a cup of coffee and watch the world go by, where are you going to sit?
I've done that twice. Now I'm going to do it again next week. It's that Mediterranean view. There's something about that Eastern Mediterranean, even the Western Mediterranean, that speaks to me. Looking out over that Mediterranean, the Aegean Sea, knowing all that culture that existed, watching a sunset disappear behind roads or whatever. It's just, I never get tired of that. I mean, I'm most creative when I'm just watching something, just like Homer talked about, the sunset over the city of Troy. It's like I'm always chasing that.
Okay, and tomorrow, if you're going to live somewhere for a year, and that's any place you can go to, where are you going to live?
So probably a Greek island, I think, just because again, where my heart is, it's like a small one. Like the one you mentioned, I have to look into that one. It won't be
Apathos.
Crete or Mykonos. It's gonna be some place where it's just some crusty guys playing backgammon, and there's one or two coffee shops and a gorgeous view. And I can be left alone for a while.
Okay. If you do go to Carpathos, they do one of the shortest flights in the world, which is to Kassos Island. And Kassos Island is even smaller. It's one little, barely a town. You've got the old guys playing their little games by the water,
Oh,
the blue buildings, the white buildings, some Greek food. Oh, it's a dream. Yeah.
you guys do me a favor and send that information to me after we
Yeah, yeah.
hang up here because I'm the kind of guy that writes that shit down and goes there.
Okay, cool. Are you a sunrise or sunset person?
I'm up early, very early. I do my creative work in the morning. I get up when the sun
Same.
comes up. I love to see a beautiful sunset, but that's with the wine in my hand and winding down. But when morning rises, so do I.
Okay.
It's already late for me. It's like, 9:53 here in New York. And it's like, oh, it's also late.
Is there anywhere in the world that you traveled to? I've probably already asked this really, that you didn't like or you wouldn't go back to?
No, people do ask. That's one of those questions I think travelers ask themselves because it's also unfair. It's about time and place. Again, I didn't like Vietnam for
Yeah.
what I saw there. I wasn't too keen on Guatemala because I did see a lot of violence, not towards me, but it was a very ugly experience. And it was very sort of crime ridden in Guat City and stuff. But again, it could be different 3 years later. So I would never write a country off or people off. I think I certainly have my affinity for certain cultures and certain sensibilities and sense of humor that other countries don't have. I'm no
Mm.
big fan of Eastern Europe, for example, because they never crack a smile. But I would not go back to Poland. It just wouldn't be high on my list. I'd rather go to that Greek island you mentioned first.
Yeah. Okay. This might be a tough question. If you could pick a favorite landmark, can be nature or man-made, what are you going to pick?
It's tough because I've seen so many. Clearly, it's Egypt because Egypt just speaks to me. There's a temple in the middle of Egypt that very few people go to called Abydos. Have you been there?
No.
It's about an hour north of Luxor, several hours from Cairo. So it's in Middle Egypt.
Yeah.
And there's a beautiful temple of Seti, which goes back to the New Kingdom. And what's amazing about it, it still has the roof on it. And when you walk into it, it still has the painting on it. So you can walk in there and feel like you're stepping back 3,000 years. And every time I do, I still get shivers because I feel like this is as close as I'm going to get to finding that portal to the past. That's where my first book takes place. That
Yeah.
is the portal to the ancient world of prime time travelers. And because it speaks to me so much, I never get tired of walking around Abydos. It's just one of those places very few people know about because it's just not convenient. People go to Cairo and they fly down to Luxor and then back home again. But if you're there for a while, I recommend everybody take a few days to go to Abydos. It's mystic.
Wow. I've never been to Egypt, so there's a shot
Oh,
for
then
me.
I got to help you out. Then you
Yeah.
give me your Greek names. I'll give you my Egyptian names.
Yeah. Okay. Last question is, if someone's listening right now and a bit nervous about going to could be Egypt or Middle East or anywhere in the world, or they haven't traveled before, what advice would you give them to say, put that flight, get out there and travel?
I mean, it's exactly what I started saying. If you believe in it, do it now. I mean, there's other ways to do it. You can always do a tour group if you're worried about doing it alone. You can always find somebody to take you around depending on your cost. But certainly with the Egypt and even like Iran, a place like that, if you can get in, it's safe that people are so embracing that it really isn't dangerous. But all I can say is, we just don't wait, just go, just figure it out. figure out your comfort level and go. Because once you do, as you also know, once that itch is scratched, it itches the rest of your life. And you have no idea what wonders await as soon as you take that leap.
Yeah, you are off if you do that first leap. That's it.
Exactly. You are constantly moving. You get home, you're jet lagged, you get out your computer and say, where am I going to next?
Yeah. Welcome to our world. Yeah. Okay,
Right.
Neil, it's been a great chat. Thanks for coming on the podcast. Real engaging, positive
Brilliant.
chat.
Brilliant.
Love talking travel. And I think you're going to provide listeners with a lot of nuggets there that are going to get them thinking.
I hope so. Thanks for having me and great questions.
Cheers, Steve. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks for tuning in to the podcast episode today. If you've been inspired by today's chat and want to book some travel, if you head to the show notes, you'll see some affiliate links below which help support this podcast. You'll find Skyscanner to book your flight. You'll find booking.com to book that accommodation. Want to stay in a super cool hostel? You'll see Hostelworld down there too. You'll find Revolut to get your travel card sorted. Click the GigSky link to get your eSIM ready for your trip. And more importantly, you'll find Safety Wing Insurance to get that travel insurance for your trip. There are many more to check out, so when you click that link and book your product, a small commission goes towards me and the Winging It Travel podcast. Thank you in advance and enjoy your travels.